A Dutch warship just entered the South China Sea. China immediately responded, and the Philippines suddenly found itself at the center of a growing global power struggle. As military tensions rise and foreign navies gather near disputed waters, one question now dominates the Indo-Pacific. Is this deterrence protecting peace or preparing the region for confrontation? A Dutch warship has entered one of the most heavily contested regions on Earth, and the move is drawing attention far beyond Southeast Asia. The arrival of the Royal Netherlands Navy frigate HNLM's De Ruya in the Philippines is not being viewed as a routine naval visit. Across military and diplomatic circles, it is being interpreted as a strategic signal about the growing international focus on the West Philippine Sea and the intensifying geopolitical competition unfolding across the Indo-Pacific. The deployment comes at a time when tensions in the South China Sea continue to rise between China and the Philippines. As the Dutch frigate sailed toward Philippine waters, reports emerged that a Chinese military helicopter approached the vessel to identify and inspect it during transit. The encounter lasted only briefly, but it immediately highlighted how sensitive and closely monitored the region has become. According to Commander Roger de Wit of the Royal Netherlands Navy, the interactee remained calm and professional from start to finish. Commander Roger de Wit said, "We were approached by a helicopter, but it was really professional on both sides." He added, Commander Roger de Wit said they asked who we were and we replied. That was enough. No confrontation occurred, no escalation followed. The helicopter eventually departed after the Dutch crew identified themselves. But even a short encounter like that now carries geopolitical significance because the South China Sea has evolved into one of the world's most strategically tense maritime environments. The timing of the deployment is especially important. The Netherlands and the Philippines are currently marking 75 years of diplomatic relations. But instead of celebrating only through ceremonies and speeches, the anniversary is being reinforced with the visible arrival of one of Europe's most advanced naval warships in Manila Bay. That symbolism matters because it reflects how European countries are becoming increasingly active in Indo-Pacific security affairs. The warship itself is not an ordinary patrol vessel. HNLMS De Ruyter belongs to the De Zeven Provinciën class of Dutch air defense and command frigates. It is one of the Netherlands' most capable surface combatants and was specifically designed for operations in high-threat environments. The vessel integrates anti-air, anti-surface, and anti-submarine warfare systems into a single combat platform capable of responding to multiple threats simultaneously. The ship carries advanced radar systems capable of detecting stealth aircraft and tracking ballistic missile threats. Its command and control systems allow it to coordinate large-scale naval operations in real time, while close-in defense systems are designed to intercept incoming missiles and aerial threats before impact. The frigate also operates with an NH-90 maritime helicopter, significantly extending its operational and surveillance reach across wide maritime zones. Together, the process sea systems transform the vessel into a floating command and defense platform capable of operating in some of the world's most contested waters. That capability is one reason why the deployment is being closely watched throughout the region. The mission is part of the Netherlands' broader Indo-Pacific deployment known as Pacific Archer, a long-range operation focused on strengthening maritime partnerships and reinforcing freedom of navigation across critical sea lanes. Dutch defense planners increasingly see stability in the Indo-Pacific as directly connected to Europe's own economic and security interests. That calculation is largely driven by global trade. Roughly one-third of global maritime commerce passes through the broader South China Sea region. Major shipping lanes connecting East Asia, Europe, and the Middle East run directly through these waters. Any serious disruption to maritime traffic in the region would create economic consequences extending far beyond Asia. For the Netherlands specifically, those concerns are deeply strategic. Rotterdam remains one of Europe's largest and most important ports, heavily dependent on uninterrupted Indo-Pacific shipping routes. Dutch policymakers increasingly argue that maintaining open sea lanes and predictable maritime rules is not simply an Asian issue, but a matter of global economic security. That perspective explains why European nations have become more involved in Indo-Pacific maritime operations over the last several years. Countries that once viewed the South China Sea as geographically distant now increasingly see it as strategically connected to Europe's own future. As a result, European governments are expanding naval deployments, strengthening security cooperation, and participating more actively in maritime operations across the Indo-Pacific. For the Philippines, those partnerships carry both practical and symbolic importance. Under Ferdinand Marcos Jr., Manila has significantly expanded defense and CQ, ready cooperation with allies and strategic partners, including the United States, Japan, Australia, Canada, and several European countries. Joint military exercises have expanded dramatically, intelligence sharing has increased, and maritime coordination has become far more sophisticated. The Philippines has increasingly leaned on international partnerships as a counterbalance to growing Chinese pressure in disputed waters. At the center of the legal dispute remains the 2016 arbitral ruling under the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea. The International Tribunal ruled overwhelmingly in favor of the Philippines and rejected China's sweeping 9-line claims across much of the South China Sea. Beijing rejected the ruling and continues to maintain its territorial position. Manila, however, insists that the decision remains final and legally binding under international law. That disagreement remains one of the defining geopolitical fault lines in the Indo-Pacific today. The Dutch deployment aligns closely with the Philippines' emphasis on international maritime law and freedom of navigation. During recent diplomatic discussions marking the anniversary of bilateral relations, Dutch and Philippine officials emphasized cooperation in maritime security, economic stability, and rules-based international order. Marielle Garrix underscored the importance of regional stability during recent discussions. Marielle Garrix said, "The stability and security in this region is also important for the Netherlands." That statement reflects a much larger strategic shift happening across Europe. European governments increasingly view instability in the Indo-Pacific not as a distant regional issue, but as a direct threat to global trade, supply chains, and international economic stability. The South China Sea has become one of the world's most important maritime choke points, meaning conflict or disruption there could affect economies from Manila to Rotterdam. Dutch Foreign Minister Tom Berendsen recently highlighted exactly that concern. Tom Berendsen said from Manila to Rotterdam, open trade routes are vital for our regions. The Philippines, meanwhile, sees growing international naval presence as visible proof that it is not standing alone in defending its maritime rights. Every allied warship entering Manila Bay sends a strategic message. It demonstrates that the dispute is no longer viewed purely as a bilateral issue between China and the Philippines. Instead, it is increasingly becoming part of a broader international debate about maritime law, freedom of navigation, and regional security. At the same time, tensions in the region continue to intensify. In recent years, Philippine vessels have repeatedly reported harassment, aggressive shadowing, water cannon incidents, laser targeting, and dangerous maneuvers involving Chinese ships operating near disputed maritime features. These confrontations have increased concern among regional government and defense analysts about the possibility of accidental escalation. For many Filipino fishing communities, these disputes are not abstract geopolitical debates. The contested waters contain rich fishing grounds and important maritime resources that support local livelihoods and coastal economies. Access to those waters directly affects families, income, and food security. That is one reason why foreign naval visits resonate strongly within the Philippines. Many Filipinos view the arrival of allied warships as reassurance that other nations are paying attention to the country's security concerns. The visible presence of international partners reinforces the idea that international law still has defenders willing to demonstrate support physically, not just diplomatically. Still, not everyone agrees on the effectiveness of these deployments. Critics argue that symbolic port visits alone cannot fundamentally alter the balance of power in the South China Sea. China's military infrastructure, upshore on disputed reefs and artificial islands, remains extensive and permanent compared with those fixed installations. Temporary naval deployments can appear limited in practical impact. Some analysts also warn that the increasing presence of foreign warships in contested waters raises the risk of miscalculation. naval ships, military aircraft, Coast Guard vessels, and surveillance platforms from multiple countries now operate in close proximity across highly sensitive maritime zones. Even professional encounters can quickly become dangerous if tensions unexpectedly escalate. That concern is exactly why professionalism during military interactions has become increasingly important. The encounter between the Chinese helicopter and the Dutch frigate demonstrated how disciplined conduct can prevent incidents from spiraling into crises. Communication remained calm, both sides acted cautiously, and the situation ended without confrontation. In today's Indo-Pacific environment, restraint can matter just as much as military capability. Supporters of these deployments argue that visibility itself plays an important stabilizing role. Their position is that transparent operations, professional conduct, and sustained international presence reinforce deterrence while reducing uncertainty. According to this view, a rules-based international order cannot survive through statements alone. It must also be reinforced through visible commitment and coordinated partnerships. That is precisely what the Dutch deployment appears designed to demonstrate. The frigate's mission reflects a broader strategic reality. The Indo-Pacific is no longer viewed as a distant regional theater. It has become a central arena shaping global trade, military balance, energy security, and international diplomacy. The Philippines now sits directly at the center of that evolving geopolitical landscape. Its geographic position places it near some of the most strategically important waterways on Earth. As competition between China and allied powers intensifies, Manila is becoming one of the region's most important security partners for countries seeking to maintain a stable maritime order in the Indo-Pacific. That trend is unlikely to slow down. Joint exercises involving the Philippines and allied nations continue to expand. Defense agreements are deepening. Naval interoperability is improving. Maritime surveillance cooperation is increasing, and European naval presence in the region is becoming more frequent. The arrival of HNLM's De Royer in Manila Bay is part of that larger strategic shift. For the Netherlands, the deployment represents strategic positioning in a region that Europe can no longer afford to ignore. For the Philippines, it represents another layer of international support amid growing maritime pressure. For China, it represents the continued expansion of foreign military presence in waters Beijing considers strategically vital. And for the broader international community, it represents the growing reality that the South China Sea is becoming one of the defining geopolitical flashpoints of the modern era. The Dutch frigate will continue its Indo-Pacific mission and additional regional port visits in the coming weeks. Its stay in Manila may be temporary, but the strategic message behind the deployment will likely remain significant long after the ship departs. The West Philippine Sea remains a region where sovereignty, military power, international law, and global alliances are all intersecting at the same time. Every naval deployment, every diplomatic statement, and every military encounter adds another layer to a strategic contest that continues to evolve in real time. The brief helicopter encounter near Philippine waters demonstrated how quickly tension can emerge in contested seas, but it also demonstrated something equally important: the professionalism, discipline, and restraint still have the power to prevent confrontation. Whether that restraint can continue to hold as military competition intensifies remains one of the defining questions facing the Indo-Pacific today. The answer is still being written across the waters of the South China Sea, one deployment at a time.